I would like first to express my joy, my recognition, my thanks to each one of you and to all what you brought here and all this intellectual solidarity with looking for a common ground, a common intellectual and conceptual ground for all scholars, intellectuals, writers, artists who are concerned with the continuous struggle between what we call Islam as a religion, Islam as a culture, and now Islam as a historical force, playing a role, a decisive role, disturbing many acquired equilibrium in the world, and creating a kind of challenge based on violence, not a violence that is emerging from within Islamic history or within Islamic doctrines, but it is emerging through the face-to-face, the rivalry between not Islam as a religion and Christianity as a religion. It's more than this and more complicated than this. What concerns me since many years is looking to the whole geo-historical space of Mediterranean area. Why giving such an importance to that space? I say geo-historical, not geopolitical, because now we are immersed in all the battles, in the short-term perspectives that started, I would say, just after the Second World War, from 1945 until today. We are immersed in continuous wars in that area. You can count how many wars we came through. And there is a war still lasting, and we see no horizon for a solution for that war. That war that recapitulates all the problems that we are discussing. I think of the symbolic space of Jerusalem. Well, all the expressions of sacred, all the expressions of sanctity, all the expressions of religions, especially monotheist religions, and all the expressions of what modern answers to produce a peaceful history. And we had violence and wars. It is that kind of violence concentrated in a very small space, daily, that is expressing, first, enormous failure, enormous historical failure of both religious reason, religious culture, religious expressions of spirituality, whatever you want. And on the other side, that modernity on which we are disputing. Because modernity is a historical substitute to all what was given to us, developed, used as an instance of authority, which we call political theology. Political theology. As opposed to political philosophy. And these oppositions go back to the very beginning of monotheism on one side, for 4,000 years before the current era, and the other axis that is present and that is working up all the cultures, all the philosophies, all what human being has produced and thought of, which is the Greek heritage, the logos and mythos on which we still are battling. These two axes, historical axes, doctrinal axes, have been present and working in the Mediterranean area, and are creating violence after violence that we cannot impose or accuse about it only religious side or only modern side. But modernity played a role since the emergence of reason of enlightenment, precisely because it had a promise, like monotheist religions had a promise to elevate human mind, to liberate human mind from ignorance, from violence, and to give to human mind all the possibilities to develop knowledge, to develop cultures, etc., etc. Okay, I would never say that modernity failed on this point. It did bring new possibilities, new visions of the human conditions. We cannot think today, we cannot progress today, and we cannot produce a culture for peace without using these tools. I never neglected this. But as a historian, we have to point out to the failures balanced by the positive acquisitions. So let me say briefly why I took my personal position facing this space, how to speak on this space, how to recapitulate the history of this space. We cannot write the history of this space now separately, as we did. Writing about this space is all the theological literatures that we produced, each community building its own theological vision of human being, of revelation, and of all this stuff, against the others. Mutual exclusion in the name of the true religion. Mutual exclusion in terms of theological systems of thinking that until now are taught in divinity schools, in the departments of the theology where they exist. Until now, we didn't overcome this theological way of thinking. And each community is using still references to this political theology to carry on the wars through which we are going. Again, in Jerusalem, all this is operating. And nobody can stop it since 60 years. It's a fact, a historical fact. Nobody can stop it, neither on the side of the modern thinking, neither on the side of democratic regimes, political regimes, even less on the side of what religions became through what has happened historically only after the Second World War. So this is the situation. Of course, we have to look larger, India, China, etc. But this space has produced two religions, Islam and Christianity, that spread all over the world. They crossed all the cultural frontiers, ethnic frontiers, political regimes frontiers. They are present everywhere. And they are expanding with their teaching the heritage of Greek thinking, the heritage of Roman concept of republic, of Roman law. Every society, every culture at least heard about it through Islam and Christianity. More through Christianity, because there is a continuity with Christianity. I come back to what you said about the Pope Benoit when he spoke about the Logos, that is in intimacy, continuous intimacy until today with the faith, while Islam, it is true, may I tell you it is true, Islam had a precarious contact with Greek thinking, because this kind of thinking, Muslims, theologians, jurists called it al-ulum al-dakhila, intrusion by force in the home of Islam. And the result of this attitude, since already Ibn Qutayba, 9th century, wrote a double katib against al-Muallim al-Awwal, Aristotle. So it is true, there is a part of truth in what he said, although he made it wrongly in the way, in his rhetoric and the way he quoted a text that he should not quote like he did. But the truth is this. And it created the unbalanced forces since 13th century until today between the world of Islam and the world of Christianity, followed by the world of secularized thinking, of secularized civilization, which we call modernity. So there is this point. We have to look and to study the reasons of the failures. Even if we have to recognize the positive sides of religious traditions and the positive sides of what modernity achieved and still is able to give us. And we need that it gives us more than it did without accepting any kind of solidarity with hegemonic policy. This is what we have to regret and to combat. Here on the side of modern thinking. What enabled me to think larger like this and to initiate a vocabulary, a full dictionary, conceptualization, as I said this morning, because we have to conceptualize this new situation if what we call the West and what we call, I don't like to say Islam, as you know, but this ideological polarization that we give the name Islam. I am born in Algeria, in a country, I told you, which until the 50s was practicing a religion, of course, called Islam. But it is just a name. And ethnographically, ethnologically, linguistically, culturally, Islam was almost not present. And as you know, historians speak about the Maghreb as totally Islamized. Islam is there, Sharia is there. And that's why when the states emerged after the independence, they had no instance of reference to build a legitimate state but that Islam, that they didn't know the levels of presence, the levels of giving to the population an instance of authority to legitimize the state. Of course, the state never looked to that side. And people were awaiting this. I came through. Tunisians, Moroccans, Algerians, Libya, all these spaces called Maghreb, were expecting a democratic regime, expecting freedom of thinking, expecting something that they got from modernity through the few aspects of modernity that circulated and were accessible to a number of people in that area. But states, under the pressure of having an identity, promoted a policy of regression. A regression, the literal meaning, regression. Regression towards what? An imagined model of Medina. The model of political regime to install in countries like those countries you know is to go back to an imagined, totally imagined model. Nothing to do with the flowers that Van Es gave us about the beginning of Islam. No reference, no idea. With even a reference telling someone what's that Medina. And I attended in Algeria 20 years the seminar organized officially by the government, the Séminaire de la Pensée Islamique, to study the Islamic thought. You can't imagine what was said each year during 10 days by the ulama invited to that seminar, officially organized, while in the same time the Algerian government made the option for collectivism. And until now we call the Democratic République Algérienne démocratique et populaire. Algerian democracy is popular and
democratic.
Popular. Yes. Which is the name of the democracy, popular democracy in the time of the Soviet Union in the West, in the East Europe. Both visions, both policies applied parallelly, and the result is what you know. Le fils du FLN, the fils the Social Party, Front Islamique du Salut, the Islamic Front for Salvation. Look to the vocabulary. And we got the civil war. So, which kind of answer we can give when you belong to such a history? Which kind of answer a historian, a scholar, can give to this situation? This was my question. Continuing to study Islam, to describe Islam historically, what they did, what they thought, what they wrote, etc.? No. It is not relevant. Then I created the expression applied Islamology. Of course, we cannot say in German, Islamwissenschaft, applied Islamwissenschaft.
Yes.
You can?
Angewandte Islamwissenschaft. Yes.
So I am really.
You can.
Yes, you can.
But I applied Islamic studies in English. It's too weak. It's too weak. I say applied Islamology because anthropologists have written books, applied anthropology. When you study oral tradition societies, you have to give something to these societies, not to write a book and go to teach it in Berlin or in New York or whatever. You have to answer to the questions of these people. This is what I mean by applied Islamology. I use all the product, all the production, all the works, and you see how always I ask to my colleagues, and they are present here, especially Hans and Stefan, who is here. I read everything they write, because applied Islamology is not against classical Islamology. It works with and on the basis of what has been produced by scholars. We have here two scholars who are model of that kind of collaborations. That's why I'm so happy that you are here. And I am sad always, I tell you always, the books written by Van Es, especially, on the 300 years of history of in the beginning, in the formative period, how many Muslims can read it, have access to it? How many? And it is crucial that this book circulates, is taught in the secondary schools. And what, instead of this, are teaching since the independence? You see, even Bourguiba, we spoke about, hesitated to touch with brutality to the Zaytuna teaching. Still, Zaytuna is a place where this kind of history, maybe some young professors now are converted to this, but it is not taught specifically, it is not taught as a to acquire the methodology to write this history, to compensate, to balance the discourse, the fundamentalist discourse that is necessary for the state to continue to be on power. The belief, the kind of belief that is constructed since the independence of all Muslim countries, and since the emergence of all the states ruling these societies, the kind of belief that is constructed is purely ideological, but it succeeded to create the fiction that they are obeying to the divine law by restoring the presence of Islam in the form it is circulating, it is practiced in all the mosques. How many mosques have been built since the independence? And what happened, which kind of discourse was spread through the space of these mosques? How many? It was the space for developing the fundamentalist vision of these societies. How to answer to these specific facts, sociological facts, political facts. I cannot rely either on what political sciences is presenting, looking to these societies in the short-term perspective, ignoring totally that the long-term perspective has to have the first place to shed more light on the historical genesis in the long-term perspective of what we call today fundamentalism. We have علم الأصول, أصول الفقه, أصول الدين. What does it teach these two disciplines? Precisely fundamentalism. Because in English or in French, we have a difference between fundamentalism and foundational. The quest for giving foundations to propositions that speak about truth, states about truth, to build the truth. They made a mixture between. And they have created, since Shafi'i, what Shafi'i did? Creating the fiction that through the hadith, of course through the Quran, it is the voice of God speaking and giving the basis for what will be called the Sharia. Now we can demonstrate, and it has been demonstrated since we start to speak about the collection of the hadith, etc., that it is a social product from the beginning to the end. That the corpus, which I call the official closed corpus corpora, official closed, two operations. Who is responsible of closing the corpus? Who is responsible of collecting and putting the corpus in one volume or several volumes and tell all this is absolutely sacred and you have to go through to enunciate any kind of law? The social construction of reality. The social construction of the reality. I thank my friends who created this event to have put his principle, this founding critical principle to produce knowledge and to communicate knowledge, to transfer knowledge in the societies. It's not yet done, even in the West, because we are still speaking transcendence, revelation, God, etc., all this vocabulary, which should be absolutely not totally forgotten because it is history. We have to use it to show that how history has built what we call belief and what we call the Word of God. And today, this belief is totally spread in all the generations born in the 70s, in the 80s, since we have the schools established by the party states in all Muslim countries. So you see that we are engaged in an intellectual struggle. An intellectual for another scholarship that will be as precise, as critical as usual in classical scholarship, but there is a new dimension now that is required from scholarship. It is to make this scholarship circulating in the societies, to obtain that it is taught, to obtain that systems of education take into account the way of speaking, for example, about the Quran. Now we are battling how to teach the religious phenomenon in French schools. It's a big question. It's a serious question. They recognize the political urgency of doing this. But we have no professors trained in the new vocabulary, trained in the work of conceptualizing, to name the Quran, to almost never pronounce the word Quran, to tell about the Quran, about the Bible, because I enlarge the concept of official closed corpus. It's not only for Islam. This vision is an anthropological vision. It applies for all the Holy Scriptures, all the corpora that are used by all religions. It's not just for the collection of the Quran or the Hadith, etc. No. Closing the corpus has enormous consequences on thinking, on the act of thinking, when you close the corpus, which means you cannot touch anything in it, even if tomorrow we have a manuscript dated from 50 years after the death of the Prophet, and we have an obvious manuscript where we compare it with what we call the official closed corpus. First we will burn it, like they burned many manuscripts like this. Burning. No trace. To continue the fiction of the divine law. Pure fiction. Also produced by the society. Produced by social actors in this society. And today reactivated by social actors who are on power and ruling the societies. We continue. So the problem rises of societies living on fictions. We are in this situation. Societies living in fictions. And if we push this fact that we observe in the majority of societies in the world, and you apply it to the democratic regimes in Europe and in America, where we have democracy, it works. But I have no time to elaborate. There is a crisis of legitimacy of those democratic societies, of the democratic regime as it is used, for example, through elections, through the law to make election. There is a manipulation of legitimacy, even in the... And when there is lies made by the state, democratic state, lies, like it happened with the Iraq work. Bush and Tony Blair have made lies to the democratic people. And for me, because I attach an enormous attention to legitimacy. Not only political legitimacy, juridical legitimacy, but I told the instance of legitimacy that would give to the knowledge produced by scholars its own authority. That is constraining for anyone who share with the scientific community the rules to be respected to produce a reliable knowledge. To have the legitimacy of being a scholar who is always looking to himself, which kind of knowledge I am producing, that it is accepted by anyone who participates to the production of that knowledge. So I have to stop, I think. Yes, still I repeat, I'm extremely happy with this event. As I told, for the 9/11, I gave a lecture in the Library of Congress, and I told there were many senators listening. I wish that this terrible political event is changed to an advent. Advent. Advent is a religious concept. The advent of Christ, the advent of Muhammad, not Muhammad ibn Abdullah, who is a simple social actor, but Muhammad the Prophet. Yes, the advent. It could be an advent. I wrote a book about the event, from Manhattan to Baghdad. Beyond, this translates my position on this. Beyond good and evil, Nietzsche has taught us. Beyond evil and good, that was the center, the core of the discourses of Bush. Beyond that discourse, which made of this event cruelty, he spoke about cruelty, that made this event even more cruel on the world level. I said this advent could be changed into advent by a specific discourse. That's why I spoke also about la parole absente, the absent word, not pronounced by any politician, by any intellectual. And this word afterwards has been pronounced, this discourse has been pronounced by President Obama. I don't know if you make the link, but me, I make it. It's not something extraordinary that he did it. Because he is looking to the world the way intellectuals, not only from Muslim world, but all the African continent, all the ancient continent, are looking to the West. The West has continued to have an hegemonic discourse. He doesn't know how to convert a catastrophic event, in terms of the evenemential history, to change it into an advent just by a discourse. I wish Obama was there in 9/11, and he could have, of course, the courage, because it necessitates the courage, to speak as he spoke in Cairo, for example, recently, although I don't accept the way he spoke about Islam, the way he used the Quran, because it goes in the way of a kind of demagogic speaking about issues that have to be faced. We have to speak about the Quran in the real terms, that the Quran cannot be anymore a constant instance of reference before this text has received its true status. I have in the book on the Unthought a long chapter. The cognitive status of revelation through the example of the Quran. Look to the title. I'm not interested only about the cognitive status in the Quran. I'm interested also in the Gospels. I'm interested in the Upanishad. I'm interested in the works of Karl Marx when they have been used by Stalin and Lenin. All the founding texts that became sacred through a process of sacralization. And now we say the saint, the holy scriptures, they have been sanctified through a long historical work inside the societies to have this qualification that they are holy scriptures, or the sacred Quran. And you know, today you cannot speak about the Quran without receiving immediately a signal to stop, because they would tell you the Quran is sacred. You have no right to speak about the Quran in terms other than sacred, recognizing the sacred Quran. Okay? Me, I say, okay, today it is sacred for millions of people. But it is sacred through a process, which is a historical process, which is a social process, that gives to this text, this discourse, that status of being sacred. If I say this and it is understood, then I stop using the Quran as a constant reference. Ministers of Interior in France, about the battles we have, continuous battles about the veil, etc. They ask me, when I meet him, please show me the verses and explain me what they say exactly. I say, Monsieur le Ministre, you are strengthening the position of those who are doing this job politically. You recognize like them. You elect like them. This text as the obligatory reference for everyone before examining what is the status of its authority today. Once you answer to me about that status, then we go on to examine what it says. But all people do this, do it. This is to show you how difficult it is to use 3 verbs that I have used in a chapter of my book on how to write history about my teacher, Claude Cahen. You know, you mentioned him, I think, in your...
Yeah.
Yes, Claude Cahen. Transgresser, déplacer, dépasser. In French, it goes well because it sounds in English, crossing the frontiers. Traverser. Transgresser.
Transgressing.
Yes, transgressing. Well, I didn't dare to. Transgressing all the frontiers of knowledge, all the frontiers of religion, all the frontiers of knowledge produced by scholars, to improve it, to test it, to test its validity, etc. Displacing. I displaced all the theological discourse to the linguistic analysis. First, it comes first methodologically and epistemologically. I cannot accept any kind of engagement, of theological engagement about the text of the Quran before we have stated
The context.
Yes.
Linguistic context.
Each word. You see, it was a wonderful example. Before stating the linguistic status of the meaning of each word used in the total text corpus of the Quran, I cannot engage in any kind of exegesis, any kind of theological statement. This is a methodology. This is a way of thinking and a way of teaching. This is what I do here in this institute, and they are very happy. They feel relieved because they can cope with the text, with intelligence, with culture, without disregarding any kind that merit respect about this text. So, thank you again for your attention, and I hope this meeting will be an advance.
We do have some time, so if there are any quick questions or observations, if you want to put to Professor Arkoun. Yes, please, Dr. Wyatt.
I hesitate to, after all these wonderful presentations, to speak, but I wanted to try to point out a link which may exist between what Professor Bilgami said and what you said.
Yes, yes.
The problem seems to be that the kind of enlightened thought and enlightened approach towards the sacred which you propose encounters the suspicion of being a hegemonic discourse imposed on people who have suffered from the crimes of colonialism.
No, I can't accept.
Let me just finish. And I think that is, at least it seems to me, is one of the problems. How can you convince somebody who has suffered, or his parents have suffered, his generation have suffered from this kind of of Western rollover. That what non-Muslims, let's say now about the Quran may be relevant when for a long time Quran and Islam in the sacred sense were important instruments of resistance. I don't have a solution for this, but I think that may be one of the problems.
Yes, I speak. I am a colonized person.
Don't.
Yes, I mean, I went through the experience. I suffered, but in the same time that I suffered, I was standing up. When I was in Oran, in the high school in Oran, I appreciated my professors. Okay, I was suffering about the system. I was looking to that system of domination, inequality, and everything. But I had the lucidity to appreciate and to thank. And I am not alone to have done this. Here is one who did it. Here is one who did it. There are, but we are not a majority. Okay. And this was the mistake this morning we spoke about Bourguiba. The majority of people, especially when they become politicians, they are obliged by the way politics work to refrain his adhesion, to refrain his will to jump to modernity with his people. Yes, this is true. And he neglected to invest his talent for pedagogy when he speaks. He is a great pedagogue when he speaks as a leader. How he explains very clearly things. To educate his people to say, this is the way we go. We have delivered us from the colonial system. Now we decide that we have to contribute to that modernity, not always to repeat again and again what we say, and to ignore and to disregard. My first duty to ask why Islamic thought went back, regressed during centuries. While Ottoman Empire had money for having weapons, etc., and make a rivalry to make his supremacy against the ascending hegemony of Europe, but he had no money and he had no idea to perpetuate and to reactivate all what has been done in the classical Islam. When you have a language like this, you are changing everything. I have never accepted this language. During the war of Algeria, with my fellows Algerians, I had debate and I opposed. I said, yes, tomorrow we shall be independent. How are you going to treat me as a historian of Islamic thought? Because I was planning already to look to that issue. Inside the war, it was difficult to do it. So this kind of discourse, until today, it doesn't exist. Because the first reason is the lack of legitimacy. When you have no legitimacy, you are dead as a state. You cannot face any kind of objective discourse, educative discourse to your people. Impossible, because you don't want to lose your power. And you manipulate the constitution to come and remain in power. What to do with this?
Any other? Yes, Sakina.
I'm asking a question about how to enable the kind of questioning that you are recommending. terms of going back to the Quran or taking the Quran out of the context. There are many Muslim societies in the world today that we know are living through situations of immense socio-economic political strife. And in situations where there is no solution. So for example,
this is a solution.
They have lost faith in the instruments of governance. Civil society institutions either don't exist or are corrupted.
Yes.
And in this situation, someone walks in, a fundamentalist, if you want to call him that, with a Kalashnikov and a Quran and says, this is your answer. This is the way out. This is how to make your life better. And they are talking to people who cannot feed their families, who have no access to education, healthcare, etc. And these populations accept the Quran and the Kalashnikov as a possible way out.
Yes.
And many of them begin by pretending to believe when they don't. But slowly they are converted. And they then believe the tenets of fundamentalism.
Yes, I know.
How do you go to these people and begin this process of questioning?
My answer to this is that people, the people, became passive. They cannot dare even to write in the newspapers, to claim from the ministers, the president, or whatever, the right to have schools. Other than the schools, they are paying to maintain the pressure of the institutionalized ignorance taught in that school. All the citizens who have some money never let their children to go to these schools. They understand why they do this. They send them to Canada, they send them to here. In all societies you find this phenomenon. That's why I call people are passive. They accept this kind of obedience. It is a phenomenon. And they continue to do this. They let the situation go on. Those who have no money, of course, their children go there. This is terrible. This is terrible. And here I can speak also on what I call the preventive democracy, diplomacy. The preventive diplomacy. It's a new way of practicing diplomacy, because you cannot impose on these people to have decent schools. But engaging diplomatic negotiation, instead of making sermons about human rights, whatever they go, having a diplomacy, because it's secret, it speaks slowly, with calm, with everything, and they negotiate. They negotiate to make business. Why they don't negotiate about humanist ideas? Telling we cannot accept this kind of teaching religion in your country because you are sending us through immigrant young people who are brainwashed. Yes, brainwashed in the worst way. Brainwashed children in the worst way, and they tolerate this. It's a non-assistance à personne en danger. No assistance to person who is in danger. It is condemned by law. But concepts like this, I speak about this. I spoke everywhere, especially in Europe. Maybe you heard me mentioning this. Yes, I am asking for a very, very peaceful way. And I'm sure in Indian government there are people who can listen to this. You will not maybe find such people in some other countries. I don't want to name it. But yes, this is the case.
We'll have a last question from Ake.
Professor, I think you raised this very interesting and difficult question repeatedly in your work, but also in these last 2 days about legitimacy. And you know, in the political sphere, there have been myths as well as thought experiments to do it. So we had divine right, and then we had the idea of a social contract, which is in its way a myth, because
I don't know it is.
So there's a whole tradition of evolving theoretical strategies to give an account of legitimacy, and I wonder, but your deeper interest is what is legitimacy in the cognitive sphere, and not just in the political sphere.
Of course,
right.
Cognitive.
Cognitive sphere.
You should have legitimacy,
Right.
so that I rely on what you propose me
Right.
as an interpretation, as a knowledge
Right.
to work with.
Exactly.
Otherwise, then
Right, but we don't have the similar theoretical tools like social contract, etc., to quite understand the idea of legitimacy in the cognitive sphere.
in the
In the cognitive sphere, we don't have thought
Yes.
experiments like
it's a good point, because you cannot speak easily with colleagues,
right.
because you feel on the same level. You cannot tell him he is an ignorant, and you are a great. No, you cannot do this. You need diplomacy, and when you use diplomacy, you are not always successful.
Right. So
Okay, go ahead.
So I was wondering whether one just in the end, because one can't do these thought experiments like a social contract, or at least they don't seem effective, and people who tried just have never succeeded. I was wondering whether there's nothing to do but rely on methods that have produced results. Is it a purely pragmatic thing in the end?
In India?
Is it purely pragmatic then, the idea of legitimacy?
No, it's not pure. No.
Is
You
it just
can
what produces results?
we carry debates. We carry debates.
Yeah.
I mentioned to you the 30 years, golden years in Paris. Not only Paris, in France, and then I traveled I visited in 1969 UCLA when von Grunbaum was the director of the Near East. And there was a debate in California, wonderful. Yes, speaking about legitimacy precisely. The legitimacy of our mandarin. Mandarin, you know, professors who play the role of mandarin. Yes, I remember, and I participated in UCLA, in Berkeley. But unfortunately, it was an event. It didn't become an advent again. Yes, because society is always stronger.
Okay, I think it's time to make this good thing come to an end. And I beg your pardon? Oh, there is a question? Sorry? Who?
There are three, but
Who is? Sorry?
there are three questions, but
Oh, three questions?
time for
Small question. Okay, all right. So the last question. Yeah.
Dr. Arkoun, in your last book, Criticizing Islamic Thought, you mentioned ما بعد الحداثة, a pre-modernity of Habermas, and what do you think the effect of this pre-modernity, after modernity on the Islamic issue?
Yes. Yes, this is also a position that I have for modernity, which is a dynamic position. There is a first modernity, It is the modernity of the encyclopedia of Diderot and the first feeling, euphoria, intellectual euphoria of something changing suddenly, etc., being liberated from the domination of the clerical power, etc., etc. First step. Second step, the debate between Hegel and Marx on the philosophy of law. Major debate after the revolution, because after the revolution the law changed in its status as law. It is produced under the choice, the option, the agreement of popular sovereignty, not anymore without any kind of reference to holy text. It is a big revolution. But there was a debate between Hegel and Marx. I don't have time to elaborate. But a debate on law that has been subverted some years before. And Hegel himself thought again afresh about law after the changing introduced by the French Revolution. And then you have Nietzsche. The subversion of the good and evil, values, ethics, subversion, genealogy of ethics, subversion, the Christian thinking about values. Values, they are guaranteed by God and they are eternal, unchangeable, etc., etc. And he historicized the concept of value. Another jump. And then went Freud. Another jump. The subcontinent of the subconscious that was unthinkable before. So modernity is a dynamic. In the same time, it makes agreements with the bourgeoisie policy to support, especially for colonial period. Modernity supported the initiative of colonizing other people, other culture, after having announced all over the world, urbi et orbi, that all human beings are equal. And the day after, they make expeditions and they conquer and they dominate. And it lasted. It is not a treason. Yes.
Treason.
A betrayal. It's not a betrayal for some time. It's a betrayal for good, for a long time. And it's not finished. But still, you have wonderful discoveries. Modernity is there. It is a continuous dynamic, continuous jump. On that point, there is no alternative so far. And on that point, when we speak about traditional cultures, they have been so heavy, exercising on societies, on the imaginary of people, such a pressure that there is no way to have access to discoveries like I mentioned. For example, philosophy of law. We are still speaking about Sharia as the law, the divine law, communicated. And who is applying it? Who is explaining it? With human beings. This is more than a fiction. It's a terrible lie to the self. A terrible lie to the self. All is coming through the mediation of human language. The Quran is coming from the mediation of Arabic language. If the Mu'tazili theory was tolerated, we would never have been facing such a situation at the end of the 20th century. Still repeating this fiction and imposing it as something that is absolute and divine. while it is Omar Ali, Muhammad who is manipulating it. And we accept it. And in the West we are very polite. We say okay. And there are places in Canada, for example, okay, you want to have a Sharia tribunal, okay, we are democratic, go on. About the veil, the burqa. There are people who say, I am a Democrat. It's her choice. It's her choice. And me, I say, it is assistance for person in danger of alienation. I'm not saying that I shall oblige her. No law. But I create places like this one in which we are speaking, that is created by a Muslim leader. He allows. We do what we do. We speak like we speak. We have the director listening. He will not punish us.
All right. Now, some
comes later.
Punishment comes later. Yeah. All right. Just a few quick closing points on my part before I ask Professor Filali Ansari to speak. Because as the co-organizer of this event, this conference, may I appeal to everyone who has presented papers, please to send written versions of them as soon as you can, so that we can publish them as an officially open corpus.
Good. I like it.
And remains for me to thank everyone, both those who have presented very stimulating papers. I think each and every paper was opened a new avenue to the mind. Everyone who has participated, and not forgetting all those people who have worked behind the scenes in utilities and organization, and above all, food and drink. To thank them all very much. To thank Professor Arkoun for being who he is, for having the mind that he has, and for applying the mind that he does, and for being with us for these 2 days.
With great pleasure and recognition.
I would like to thank Professor Filali Ansari, because without him this conference would not have taken place. And I mean not just his role in supervising it and supervising the logistics of it, but for the vision behind it. I know him from the time he was in Casablanca, in a very, very eminent position and a comfortable position, and he left it to come to this challenging institution, which and saw it through its teething troubles, because the teething troubles of an institution are much of far greater duration than of a human organism. One might say they are of elephantine proportions, and he has steered the institute through that difficult but very challenging phase, and he gave up his position in Casablanca to come here for one reason, I know, and for one reason alone, which was the integrity of his passion and commitment to the intellectual cause that this institute represents. So we all are very deep gratitude to him for this. Now, with those words, I'll call upon you now to close the conference.
First of all, I'm humbled by your remarks. I'm really feeling very deeply about what you have said. I must say that this is a most difficult moment for me, because I'm sure that, I have enjoyed these discussions so much, and I'm sure that I'm not the only one in this room. We all have enjoyed the presentations and the discussions, if I could express my feeling in a different language, if I felt like a spoiled child, surrounded by his favorite playmates. And my temptation is to say, I don't want you to go. So, well, it has been, I have organized conferences before, and a number of them, and I must say that this one has something had something very special about it. Of course, it was paying tribute to a very distinguished colleague and a great actor, I think, of the intellectual scene of contemporary times. I think it was also a conference that brought, if I can use the language of gardeners, a very good harvest. And I would say it in our own speak, at the same time, the presentations were such that we immediately envisioned a very good book out of what has been given to us. But as you were saying, Aziz, many avenues were open for me. Clearly, we could identify a number of questions that were clearly or were strongly shown to be important in this conference. We have questioned a number of categories that we may, or even in scholarly circles, we tend to take as given, and authenticity, we began by that, was one of them, but it was not the only one. We have also questioned our understanding of processes in history. We're questioned at our own feelings about great changes or turns that happened in our times. We have brought to the fore a number of ways of raising the question about why reformism did not, and this came from presentations of yesterday and today. So I see this as maybe this is another tribute we need to pay to Arkoun, as enabling us to come to the point where such questions come to the fore. I remember, I must say this, a few years ago, Professor Arkoun, I'll say Si Mohammed, and I were sitting in a conference in which I don't find the English word for it, une empoignade took place, a very heated debate among some Moroccan intellectuals. And Si Mohammed and I were trying to identify who were the Arkounians of the left and the Arkounians of the right. So here, I think in this conference we have gone much further than this kind of
wonderful, yes.
Than this kind of heated debate. We did have some heated moments, but I think we had an example of how a good conversation could be between historians and philosophers.
Yes.
Because this is what has been going on in those 2 days. I think we had a number of very distinguished historians and a number of very distinguished philosophers, and they had to say, one of our colleagues was saying, I didn't expect things to be like that, but at the end he was engaging with us fully. So I think this is something I personally have some reservations when people talk about multidisciplinarity and interdisciplinarity, but I think what we have done was a dialogue and thinking across disciplines where this kind of dialogue and thinking needs to happen and where it really pays back when it happens. So I think, another point comes to my memory. We have been mentioning the two men from Kabylie until now. I think maybe that historians who will come centuries from now may be tempted to say that God sent one man from Kabylie and put people under his spell, then he sent another one to correct what the first one has done. So I would like, again, I must thank each and every one of the colleagues who came and gave us their contributions. It was really a great moments of learning, of discussions, and I'm grateful to all of them.